Rev up your engine! Now you get oil leaks in your car, they can come from many places. It can be a stinker figuring out where they're coming from because, as my father always said, don't assume it's only one leak. You could have lots of leaks. The old way was to clean everything off. The engine, the transmission, dry it. Real pain in the butt, then seeing where the leak's coming from. Well, today things are a lot simpler. You get ultraviolet leak dye that's made for engine oil, a UV light, see? Shining UV, and yellow sunglasses so you can see where the dye's coming out. In this case, I can see engine oils coming from around here, but when I go under the car, I can see the bottom of the engine's got a lot of oil on it. Not the transmission, but just the engine. We're pouring the engine oil if we can get it open. It's on there tight. I guess they were worried that was leaking, so they put it on super tight. Pour it in. Put the top back on and drive it around about 15-20 minutes. Okay, now it's driven around. It'll circulate all the oil dye so we can figure out where the leak's coming from. And like I said, it can come from many places. Don't just think one is it. That's why the dye is best. You don't have to worry about cleaning off the old stuff because the dye will glow where it's leaking from, and you'll be able to see any oil leak. So luckily these fit over my glasses, so I can get the yellow, kind of weird looking, but let's start looking around. You can often get a little oil seepage around the valve cover gasket on an engine that's got over 200,000 miles. That's not where the oil is dripping to the bottom. That's just seepage. It doesn't show any dye coming out yet, so that's just a minor thing. So we'll jack it up in there and look under the engine. Now we get a little mat and a jack stand. And as we go under, we can see it's wet around. Now, you don't really notice much, but when you put the dye on, okay, there it is. Green dye's coming from up in here. And what's up here? Well, that's a front main seal of the engine. And when we look at the back side of the engine, there's some more. It's leaking from the back side of the engine too. Now the front side is bad enough because you got to take the front of the engine apart, the timing belt off. You'd have to change the front main seal while you're at it. You might as well change the oil pump seal and the camshaft seals, which is expensive enough. But the rear main seal leak is between the engine and the transmission. And you either have to pull the transmission off or the engine, and that costs a lot of money. I'm going to try this Lube Guard seal fix. Lube Guard makes some pretty good products. I've been trying this out because the AT205 is kind of hard to find, and this seems to be similar stuff. I think it might be exactly the same, is because look, it looks like water, right? Looks like water. That's exactly what the AT205 reseal looks like. So I think this has the same stuff in it. So what you do, pour it in the engine oil, the whole bottle. The only time will tell if this works, but I really think it's the same as the AT205 reseal because main seals, power steering, automatic manual transmissions, and differentials. And that's exactly what I use the AT205 reseal that I can't get here. In Rhode Island, nobody sells it. You got to wait a few hours of operating time. You drive it around, you have to do it all at once, you can drive it over time. And basically, it even warns you. It says if it's still leaking like mad after 2 or 3 hours, get it mechanically fixed. Well, this is not leaking like mad. It hasn't even dripped on the ground here yet. It will eventually. But rather than pulling the engine out or the transmission out, taking the whole front of the engine apart, if this fixes it, hey, you saved yourself a ton of money. I realize this, any car that's got over 200,000 miles on it, hey, the seals are going to be somewhat worn from the engine spinning them, right? Let's say this works and it stops leaking. All you have to do is every time you change your engine oil and filter, add another bottle. Because when you change the oil and filter, you're also getting rid of this additive, which to me looks like the same polymer that AT205 has. It's got the same direction, so I'm assuming it's the same stuff. It even looks the same, right? You have a problem like this that isn't especially major like this. I've seen these things actually stop when they're pouring out. But with a little drip like this, I get a pretty good idea that this is going to really either slow it down or stop it entirely. Now, of course, in a perfect world, you would pull the engine or transmission out, replace the front main seal, the oil pump, camshaft seals on top of the engine. But let's face it, it's an old car with over 200,000 miles. You're going to spend over $1,000 having that kind of work done. If this stops it, and you only got to pay $14 every time you change an oil extra for pouring this stuff in, what the heck? Especially in terms of a Toyota. They make pretty good seals. They generally don't crack and break apart. They just get somewhat worn. And since these seals are an oil seal that has a spring inside it, the spring is holding the seal on. So if the seal isn't all supple and pliable, it'll leak. But if this makes the rubber more pliable, the spring holding it on will help hold it in. That's why this stuff works for seals, not oil gaskets. Because a gasket, like on an engine, it's bolted in place, right? It's just sitting there. And if it's worn out, it's cracked, and then it starts leaking oil. Let's say you had a side oil leak and it's a gasket, not an oil seal, just a gasket. You can go and try to tighten it. Sometimes they shrink in tightening and they won't leak, or sometimes you tighten and they'll leak even more if they're cracked, and that breaks them entirely, come pouring out. No sealer is going to fix that. You can't put a sealer in, for example, that's going to stop valve cover leaks, because that's just a valve cover gasket. It's not an oil seal. But in this case, it's the oil seals that are leaking. So why do these oil seals leak? Unfortunately, there's only two reasons. One is if you buy a poorly made car and it's got poorly made seals, they leak because they weren't made right, and after so many hundreds or thousands or millions of rotations, they just wear out and they start pouring out. But in the case of Toyotas, the main reason the oil seals leak is because people don't change the oil enough. That's why you want to change your engine oil every 5,000 miles or so, or once a year. Because the oil seals are made out of rubber, right? I mean, GM tried some Teflon seals. Boy, they didn't work. They leak like a sieve, and everybody replaced them with regular rubber ones later. You got dirty oil. What is dirt? Dirt is friction, like sandpaper if it's dirty enough. It's bad enough that friction and dirt is wearing the metal pistons in your engine, which of course takes a really long time to wear them out, right? They're made out of rubber. And what's going to happen with rubber? When it gets friction on it, it will have much more wear on it than metal. So even though you might think, oh, it's just an oil seal, it only costs $22. Yeah, but if you got to pull the engine or transmission out to replace that seal, that $22 is going to go up to $1,000 or more in many places. It's an awful lot of work that you can avoid in the first place by just changing the oil regularly. I say, no, it's an old vehicle, I don't need to change the oil on it. If it leaks or burn oil, I just add it. You still got to change it. How do you think this 17-year-old motorcycle still runs like a top, doesn't drip any oil? Look how shiny it is. There's no oil leaking. There's no oil leaking on the floor. My wife would be mad after I made a nice floor, right? And it's 17 years old because the oil has been changed regularly. It's taken care of. It goes really fast because it's been taken care of. And the main thing, if you do nothing on a vehicle other than put air in the tires when it gets low, go and change the oil every 5,000 miles or so with full synthetic oil. That's a better oil, lubricates better, keeps cleaner. And of course, if you live in northern climates, it flows better. So instead of having a car, when I was young, they had straight weight oil, 10 weight oil, 20 weight oil, 30 weight oil, 40 weight oil, just one weight. And if you had the summer 40 weight oil in the winter, you'd crank the engine over, and it'd start up. Synthetic oils flow great and they'll start right up in the winter. So there's a lot of reasons you want to do it. They'll last longer, and you won't have to spend money fixing things that cost a fortune that would have never broken except that you didn't change the oil enough. Just remember this. It's simple. Oil, cheap. Engines, expensive. Even changing a $20 engine rear main oil seal is expensive because you either got to pull the engine or the transmission out to do the work. Why you'd want to take a chance of that versus just changing the oil is beyond me. Strangest thing is, of course, it's more important to do on an older car because the new car's new and the seals are new, and of course they're going to seal better, right? But an old car, everything's old. You actually need to take better care of an older car than you do a newer car. So just keep changing your oil every 5,000 miles. Cheap thing. Do it yourself. If you don't, find a place that does it for a reasonable price that doesn't rip you off. But the way it is today, everybody rips everybody off. So even the oil change joints, you go to them, they'll try to sell you 50 things while you're getting your oil changed, and they'll sell you some bulk oil that's in a container that they buy cheap. And I know a guy who runs a discount oil thing. He buys his oil filters for 99 cents a piece, right? Hey, you don't want 99-cent oil filters. You want quality ones. So if you do it yourself, believe me, you're going to save a lot of money in the long run, and you're not going to have to worry about people trying to sell you a bunch of crap that you don't actually need. Now, the leak stop will take 200-300 miles to really do its job. But I was just talking to the husband who owns this car. He tells me they keep having a ton of oil. It's not leaking a ton of oil. It's only leaking a little. This is the infamous Toyota 2.4-liter engine that burns oil because the piston rings are worn out. All I got to do is pull out a spark plug, take the cover off, take out one spark plug. First, you take the coil off, remove it, and we'll check one spark plug. We can see it's burning oil. The firing end is oily. It's burning oil. So it's burning oil. You'll live with that. My grandson's got one, Camry, same engine, burns oil. He carries oil in the trunk and adds it. Every time he fills it up, he checks it. And then adds whatever he needs to add. Simple to do, but you're not going to rebuild an engine on an old car like this. It's not worth it. Put the spark plug back in, put the coil back on, bolt it in place, and put the beauty cover back on. It's not very beautiful anymore, but it's here, so you might as well stick it back on. And realize you're just going to be adding oil to it a lot. You live with that, you don't rebuild an engine, but it can still run a long time. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.